Pot of Ties weekly client coaching call. Going to record an episode here today, and the topic is going to be about batch recording, all things batch recording, preparing for it. And so I know, Scott, this is probably old news to you, but lots of fun stuff, I think, to talk about. And it's a good refresher for everybody, whether you're starting out or you're already an experienced podcaster. So going to do that. Then we'll have some Q&A. You all get just me today. Tracy is on a plane headed east for some event in Florida. And so happy to be with you today. And let's get going. I don't see any reason to hold off. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Feed Your Bear. I'm going to do that again. My tang was tangled a little bit. Sorry, guys. Since that was at the very beginning, I'm going to stop and start again. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Feed Your Brand. I'm Tom Hazzard, your host for today. Today, I want to share with you some thoughts about batch recording. This is something that a lot of podcasters do, but not all podcasters. In fact, this episode, I'm recording live, streaming it to my community online. So I am not batch recording. I'm actually recording this live. But often I do batch record. And certainly I started my podcasting journey many, many years ago, about a decade ago. And batch recording was essential and really was critical to me, making it practical to show up for my listeners every week. And in fact, my first podcast, it was several times a week, 5 days a week. But even if you're not trying to put out that much content and you just want to show up weekly, it's very important. Batch recording is critical to doing it. So I want to talk a little bit about some best practices for batch recording, and also here setting up, talk about some of the critical benefits. And again, it is maintaining a regular posting schedule for your podcast. Publishing your episodes is really essential to attract dedicated following of loyal fans. They want to know you're going to show up for them every week at minimum. That's what podcast listeners are looking for even today. And yes, it's been different. It's changed over the years, but podcast listeners, when they find a show, they not only are going to make sure, number one, you're still publishing, like you've published something in the last week, but that you've been doing it consistently. And even before they click to listen and give it a try, because if it's a show that's really old, that faded 6 months ago, a year ago or more, they may, have second thoughts about, listening and investing in it. Is the content still relevant? Is there enough of it that I'm going to get enough value? I'm going to invest my time in it. But then, did it stop abruptly or did it come to some conclusion? But they're looking at these things and deciding and looking through your last 10 episodes and seeing, oh, every Thursday they've been publishing, and I can see those dates. Yeah, those are only all 7 days off. They're showing up weekly. All right. If I invest my time and I subscribe to this podcast, they're going to keep showing up for me weekly. That is the impression it makes. And it's really important. If you do that, you show up regularly, they will faithfully keep tuning into you every week. They will be there. And so that's the importance from a listener growth perspective, right? Attracting those listeners who are looking for that regular content. But how do you stay regular? I mean, have some people say, I can't do it every week. I only want to do every other week. And you know what? If your podcast publishes every other week, it looks very inconsistent to people, and they're less likely to subscribe and invest in, listening to you. But guess what? You don't have to do it every week. Batch recording is essential, and I think most common amongst really serious and experienced podcasters, that's for sure. That yeah, you're going to take time off Thanksgiving week. You're probably not going to record anything if you're in the United States, right? And during the holidays, whether you're celebrating Hanukkah or Christmas and you have New Year's and all that, you've got a few weeks there where you probably would have trouble booking a guest during those times, and you may not want to be doing it yourself. But does that mean you still can't publish one every week? Tracy and I, in our experience in podcasting from the earliest days, decided, nope, we're going to show up on our schedule, regardless of if it's a holiday and, if we're available or not, if we're really working or not. It, podcasts are just a wonderful medium that you can schedule something months ahead. In fact, we have customers we produced episodes for well into 2023 already who get way ahead into their production, and we do the work and it's scheduled, it's locked and loaded, and it's gonna publish regardless of what that podcast host is doing, traveling to an event or just heads down doing work or meeting on site with clients or customers. Why do you have to not publish a show just because you're not recording for a few weeks? I mean, these things, if in your mind these things are connected, I want to help you disconnect those things right now. One has nothing to do with the other. Your podcast can show up for your guests weekly. Now, there may be something that comes up that's timely and newsworthy in your industry, and even though you've got things scheduled out for a couple of months, you want to record an episode and you want to get it published within, a week or two and break into your schedule. Obviously, you can do that if you want to, but batch recording and scheduling ahead is the key to consistency. And you really want to avoid leaving your listeners hanging. And, if you have to skip a week and so, but you let's say you put out one show a week. The recommendation for batch recording, and admittedly, this is harder to do as a brand new show. If you're recording those first 6 or 10 or 12 episodes early on, you may want to adjust your schedule to work around, if you're interviewing guests, your guests' schedule, because you're just starting out. But once you really have this show launched, my recommendation is take one day a month. Could even be one afternoon a month, and set that aside for recording episodes. If you're well prepared, one afternoon a month, you could record 4 to 6 episodes. If you're doing a whole day, you could record 8 to 10. And I've done it. I know from experience. I'm not just suggesting this, and it's something I haven't done. Tracy and I, our first show literally was 5 days a week. And we would take 2 days a month and record 20 episodes. And then they'd give you scheduled out. So every weekday of every week we were showing up. Didn't matter if it was 4th of July. It didn't matter if it was, Veterans Day or Thanksgiving or whatever. The episodes were there for our listeners. And boy, did they listen. They binged through them all. We had quite a large audience, but because we were providing a lot of content. Now, there were different kinds of episodes. Not every episode was an interview episode. Some of them were just me and Tracy and were shorter format, 15, 20 minutes. For most of those daily episodes, one day a week was an interview. So I want to share some things about preparation, because key to batch recording is preparation. Not only in terms of topics, what are those topics going to be, and having some bullet points if those topics have any reference articles or YouTube videos or things that you want to, make sure that you have available to mention to the listener and to provide in your blog post, show notes for the episode. You want to have all that prepared. So you may want to use an online calendar program. And in our early days of our WTFFF 3D printing podcast, we used a tool called Basecamp. I'm sure a lot of you know it, has a calendar function. And one of our primary things we used it for was just to plan out our editorial calendar. What are our topics going to be for the next month? And even we would try to go a little farther than that, because we would record in 2 days an entire month's worth of content. So having those topics, so you're not sitting wondering, all right, what am I going to record about for the next episode? No, you need to have a topic and have 3 to 5 bullet points you want to cover within it. And that's if you don't have a guest you're interviewing. Now, if you do have a guest, then you got to plan out that guest. You have to plan scheduling to record that guest. But again, if you're going to record multiple guests in a single day, which we recommend you do if you're batch recording and you have a guest format podcast, that you're very prepared with the information about that guest, what you think some important topics might be to discuss, even preparing a few questions in there. And so we would prepare for ourselves a document for every interview episode. And we had an assistant doing this for us, doing a lot of the research and preparing that doc. We did it ourselves first, set up the format, and then had an assistant do this, where the assistant would go and get their bio, find any key points, recent news, look at their social media, give us some key highlight points we might want to ask them about or reference or just talk about in the episode, and then some suggestions from some key questions. And having a document prepared like that for every guest makes it much easier to do back-to-back recordings. Or, we do recommend you take like a 15-minute, bathroom break in between interviews, and also to change your shirt if you're doing video, your shirt or your blouse, or throw a jacket on or something. If you're doing back-to-back interviews, when you're batch recording, you got to think about these things, because when people hear you on podcast, I could be in my pajamas and recording solo episodes late at night, no one would know. But if you're doing video, obviously that's very obvious. And we always felt like you don't want to make it look like you've just recorded back-to-back episodes. So changing your shirt or blouse, or somehow changing your appearance a little bit in between, is recommended, and helps your audience feel like you're just authentically doing this at different times every week along the way, even though you're not. So a little tip about the video there, but getting off track a little bit. Really, I was talking about the document to prepare. And that is really essential. The only way you're going to be able to go within, let's say an hour and a half from one guest interview that's scheduled, conducting that and being done with it, to the next, is if you're prepared and you have that very well organized. And I would recommend having reviewed that even ahead of time a little bit before you sit down, make a little notes, on that document, so you're prepared for that recording day. So a little bit of preparation goes a long way, and makes it more possible, helps you be more present and mindful of who you're talking to and what you're talking about in that episode. And I'm not going to lie, these can be pretty intense days of recording, whether it's a half a day or a whole day, or like Tracy and I used to do 2 days in a month. I think we would took like Monday and Tuesday, late in a month, and recorded, upcoming, and we would get 6 to 8. Well, I'm sorry, for certain podcasts, 6 to 8 done. But for our first podcast, we really got 20 episodes, 4 interviews at least, if not 5. We tried to get ahead. And then at least then 16 individual shorter subjects just for the 2 of us to discuss, and get them all scheduled out for the month. And it worked very well. We did that for multiple years. Eventually we dialed it down to 3 a week, and then 2 a week, and then eventually 1 a week. And that podcast ended after about 650 episodes. Although I actually recently have started recording a new special 12-part series to resurrect that podcast. And when I do that, I'm going to do an episode on that. So watch for that in the future. I've recorded a few of the episodes, but I'm going to report more on the interesting part is going to report on what happens when you have a podcast that's gone dormant, still been out there, and then you come back out with a series of a dozen episodes. What did I experience, and what might we expect when we do something like that? So little preview for something coming up in the future on Feed Your Brand. But batch recording is essential recommended and really critical. So we talked about the benefits for your listener to batch recording. We've talked about preparation with a document. Now I want to talk about another level of preparation, and that is scheduling. This is also the third critical element to batch recording. We highly recommend, and we've talked about this on past episodes of Feed Your Brand, that you have a booking calendar link using a tool like Calendly or Once Hub, used to be called Schedule Once, or, I don't have a dog in the fight of booking calendar systems. I personally don't even really care at all which one I use or we use as a company. I have somebody else figure that out, because that's sort of something I don't really have time to figure out. I just need it to work. And we use Calendly and it works. So just decide on one, choose it. Most of them have the ability for you to not only decide, all right, for this kind of appointment, which is a podcast booking appointment, I am only going to open up my calendar on this one day of the month, or these 2 days of the month for such interviews. I'm not going to let people book just anytime they want to, any way they can. So you want to pick the days that you're going to record and stick to it. Now, again, like I said earlier, the caveat might be when you're first starting a show, you might not want to restrict the days, and you may have, legitimate reasons for doing that. But once you're ongoing, you definitely want to restrict those days. And anybody who's going to be a guest, you invite more people than you're going to record on that day or those days. And if there isn't a slot available, then that offers them the 1 or 2 days the next month that you're available. Or if they're not, even if you have time available and they're not available that month, they'll book out to the next month. You want to get to the point where this is pretty self-service and hands-off for you, and that, you're doing it. You can set the calendar so it'll only book one person every 2 hours if you want. And so that gives you, time to record the episode with the guest, say goodbye to them, then maybe record a little introduction and your final thoughts that are the different segments you might put together into that one episode. So you do it while it's fresh in your mind, and then you still have time for a bathroom break or get a drink of water, a bite to eat, whatever you might need to do. So you can see how if you set aside a whole day, that might be an 8-hour day. If you're all doing all interview episodes, you might only get 4 in or 5 in if you're willing to go a little longer. But in terms of scheduling, you want to think about the schedule, and you can set these rules in your booking calendar. I'm available these days for this kind of appointment. The appointment's going to be set for an hour long, but you won't let the calendar book back-to-back appointments 1 hour, then the next hour. You can set a rule that it's going to give you an hour break in between the end of a previous meeting before a next meeting is going to start. All these things can be dialed in. And not only that, in your booking calendar, you can have when they book, the guests fill out a form where you're collecting their headshot, their bio info, all the different things, getting them to agree to being recorded, acknowledge they're going to be recorded and published. So you sort of have that kind of a release covered. So booking calendar is very important. It does many things, but obviously today we're talking about just scheduling your episodes to be recorded on the days you want them to be recorded. So it doesn't just interrupt your work schedule and then you're not in the headspace for recording a podcast, or, because things happen. You get some surprising news, some good news, some bad news, whatever. And then you have this guest you've booked to record a podcast, and you got to sort of get your mind in that game. It can be hard to sort of shift gears. I think it's easier if you're going to batch record and you're in that mindset, and you're present, your phone is on airplane mode, and you're not, your email alerts are off, you're not getting distracted by those things, and you can focus. So booking calendar link, critical for your schedule for batch recording. Highly recommend it. preparation, both of the booking calendar link to collect information from the guest, but also preparation where, you or an assistant on your behalf can prepare a document for every interview that gives you, a handy reference sheet to have, like, at your desk or on the side of your monitor with those key things, just to, refresh your memory, make sure there wasn't a point you missed and, didn't want to, cover. And then, of course, the most important thing is to just get those episodes recorded and banked up. You have them locked and loaded, and you show up regularly for your listeners, and then they will appreciate you more, they'll value you more, because you're showing up every week or twice every week or whatever it is. And they'll, as long as, keep in mind, they've opted in, they want to listen to you, they want to hear from you. So you show up for them consistently, they're going to be loyal to you because you're being loyal and showing up for them every week. And that is a recipe for success with podcasting, and super critical to growing your audience. The only other thing I guess I would say, for the little last tidbit, for those of you that are just starting and launching a podcast, you might consider in the first 2 months increasing the frequency of publication more than the minimum once a week that we recommend. If you're going to do 1 a week in general, you might do 2 a week in those first 8 weeks, or even 3 if you can swing creating the content. Recently was just talking with a doctor practice who's launching a new podcast, and there's a new doctor in the practice who doesn't have their appointment schedule filled up yet. New doctor joining the practice, doesn't, patients are booking with other doctors as this new doctor is getting to be known. They have a podcast that they're launching, and that doctor's available. And guess what? Is recording a huge amount of content and episodes during these days when he has more time. And so that they get not only a lot more content published sooner, but a lot locked and loaded, again, batch recording for the future. And it's a brilliant strategy. So, all of you listening may have different reasons for why you may want to do that. And you know what? Some of you, if you're recording kind of the way I am right now, where I'm live streaming this to my audience first, you can't batch record. That's okay too. Not every podcast is meant for batch recording, but I think the vast majority are. The vast majority of podcasts that I have ever recorded and produced have been pre-recorded and batch recorded. And it's been one of the keys to our success in those podcasts and at Podetize. So I hope you got some good value out of this topic. Please let us know. You can go to podetize.com. There's a page for Feed Your Brand, and that's where you'll find the blog post for this episode. We'll have links to any of the companies and things that we have discussed. If you wanted to look at the video for this podcast, you'll find it there. And obviously all the other content we have created. So if you have questions about podcasting, go to that Feed Your Brand page, go into one of the blogs, and there's a nice search bar, and you can just type in what your needs are, what you want to find out about podcasting. And I will bet there's an episode there for you that you can check out and would be providing you some support. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. I'll be back next week with another great topic and great episode. This is Tom Hazzard for Feed Your Brand. Until next time. Okay. So there you go. Cody, did we have any
no comments anywhere
comments
right now.
or anywhere?
No,
okay,
but
great.
I do see we have a couple people tuning in on Facebook, and there was a couple people there for a second on LinkedIn. So
that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
Hey, it'll be out there. All right, we got a hand raised. Who's got the
Ooh,
hand?
nice.
Rosie. Okay, Rosie. If I will allow you to talk, if you would like to unmute.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing well. So my question is, I understand the whole batch recording and that's, but how far out is it customary to batch record? So for example, I was a podcast guest yesterday. I am starting to be a guest on podcasts, so that's kind of cool.
Good.
But when I asked the lady, I was like, okay, so when's the episode released? She's like, February. Like, February?
Yeah.
To me, that's like way too far out. I usually stay like, well, just because I have a full-time job still, I'm about 4 weeks ahead. But
wonderful.
February is just way too far out. So that was my question. Like, what is the good standard that you're far out enough so that you can, take time off like you were saying, but it's not so far out that I'm not going to remember I record as when it comes on in February. So yeah.
Fantastic question. Thank you for sharing that question. I personally feel the ideal sort of depth of recordings would be 4 to 6 weeks. That's what I think is ideal, where you're out far enough that you really have some breathing room. You cannot think about it for several weeks, 3-4 weeks at least. And, you're going to have time to record some more content and not be just in time before, one publishes. That's just what I personally think, but there is no standard. There is no magic, number of weeks or months. And I'll tell you, one of our customers, and I was just checking, shockingly, one of our customers has historically been out like 4 to 6 months, really. And it gets to be problematic. Not only like you were experiencing with this person, you were a guest on their show, that you're like, February, I have to wait that. I've invested my time in this and you're not going to give me value in publishing until February. That's an uncomfortable conversation for a podcast host to have. And I think the dissatisfaction that you're feeling is something that a lot of guests feel. So you want to balance recording ahead and giving yourself some breathing room, but not being so far ahead that people are like, really? That I have to wait that long? Am I even going to remember that I recorded this with you? Is anything I said going to be relevant then? I mean, there's a lot of things I think can go through our minds with that.
Right.
And so shockingly, this one customer who is an existing customer, I don't mind sharing, John Livesey, the successful pitch, historically has been 3 to 4 months out. And I'm going to have to reach out to him because his furthest future episode is a month from now, and that's unusual for him. I want to make sure he's okay and still, recording episodes. But let's see. That is a real valid concern. And here's actually, here's one of the problems that happens. I remember this happened with John Livesey quite a bit. He'd have all his stuff. We would already have produced them 3 months ahead. And then he has an episode like, hey, I got this one episode and the guest has a book publishing in 3 weeks. So I really want to insert this one in the schedule. And then that becomes a mess of taking the entire schedule and moving it out a week. And when you have 3 months worth of episodes in the future, that's an awful lot of episodes to reschedule. But to insert one in, that's where it can be problematic when you go out too far. And in that case, I often suggest to people, let's publish an additional episode and not just move the schedule out. Maybe 1 week, publish 2 instead of 1. And certainly you can do that. So your question is a good one, but there's not an absolute answer.
Right.
But I think 4 to 6 weeks is a good range. And I don't think anybody's going to complain that it'd be 6 weeks till their show airs. I think it's reasonable.
Yeah, I would agree. But I mean, again, like 16 weeks, that's just way too much. And also I wanted to tell you, I'm 4 downloads short of 2,000,
Awesome.
So I'm
Yay.
excited. Yay. So
congratulations. Wonderful.
thank you.
Actually, since we're talking to you, I'm going to be reaching out to you most likely tomorrow to see if there's an event that is taking place in the not too distant future where Tracy wanted to invite you to see if you wanted to go to that event and have an opportunity to interview several people for your podcast there. She thought it might be a good fit for you, and it may or may not be something you're interested in, but I'm gonna reach out to you and let you know about that. So
that's great. All right.
so,
Excellent.
alrighty.
Thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate
Sure
it.
thing. My pleasure. All right. Let's see. What else do we? Ooh, somebody dropped off. I heard a sound. All right, so let's see. Carson commented. Oh no, Claire. Sorry, Claire commented that she uses Zcal for her calendar, and it's free and it's very easy to use. Wonderful. I don't know Zcal. But that's great. I think that's something that people should know about. There's lots of tool options there, and like I said, I sort of don't have a preference in all those things, but it is essential to have one. Scott Carson commented here that batch recording has helped us tremendously with our online conferences, special events like International Podcast Day and International Social Media Day. Now that's a different kind of batch recording. That's interesting. And I didn't talk about that in the podcast episode that I probably could have. And Scott also has events he puts on of his own that are like mastermind and educational series over several days. He does one called Note Camp. So that's a different kind of batch recording. And I have done that personally myself. I think one year, Scott and I on International Podcast Day each were running a day full of nonstop back-to-back podcast interviews, live streaming on Facebook. That was intense. And it was a lot of fun, but boy, did it get a lot of content created in a short period of time. And and then I think Scott and I, for one of those sessions, were each a guest on the other show that day, I think, what we were doing, but we teamed up for part of it. And that's a wonderful thing and a very different thing. So what we did there is we decided way ahead we were going to do International Podcast Day and have, I think it was something crazy like 10 hours straight of live streaming and guest interviews. And we offered to some of our customers who are podcasters, especially ones that were more experienced, to come on, and we would have different discussions about all sorts of things around podcasting because it was International Podcast Day. So it was great topics that were really in alignment with our podcast subject matter. And then we live streamed them, but then we repurposed them as podcast episodes and published them on Feed Your Brand, I believe. And then I don't know what Scott published some of his on, but it was great. We got a lot done. It was an exhausting day because that literally was back to back to back. I mean, I think I had to schedule in a 15-minute, put up a little graphic that says be back soon and go use the bathroom and, swallow a protein bar or something quickly. Cause when you're doing this live stream all day type of thing, you sort of have to be there or have somebody that you're somebody's going to tag in and take the mic for a little while you have a slight break. But it's a great event to do something like that because you get people engaged, you get people to sign up ahead of time, sign up for slots to be interviewed. And I know Scott does this with his Note Camp. He gets different speakers to all show up, and he even gives them graphics ahead of time. So they promote it on social media because you're going to be doing this live and you want people to show up to the live event. So he gets the guests to promote it ahead of time and show up. So live event and at event podcast batch recording, I think, are other great facets of this and things to discuss. I would call them a little more advanced topics. So that could be another Cody, note this for future, to really focus on that batch recording for a live event.
Of course.
Might be another great episode to do at some point, because there's a lot of nuances and details of that we could share with people that would be helpful. And not only that, some of the tools, like I know you did an episode on Restream that we're using now to go live everywhere, but you want to decide, you're going to do a live event, where are you going live, where are you showing up, and are there some limitations? And those are other things too. Fun stuff. Tracy and I are trying to bring back, now that things have moved on and we are post-pandemic, going in more live events. We want to revive the podcast publicity pop-up, which are things where there are certain events that are appropriate and have a lot of people at these events who might be great guests for podcasters. To have 2 or 3 podcasters come in, let the whole event know, hey, you can sign up to be interviewed on this podcast. There are slots available. You mine the attendees of the event to record a lot of content. The event is providing value to those attendees, and you as a podcaster are getting value, getting to record some people in person you otherwise might not record in person, or a certain maybe different level of guests than you might have had before. But certainly, if nothing else, getting some batch recording done in a different way. And I think, as they say, content is king. It's true in podcasting. It's true in blogs and websites. And to us, it's all the same, because it's all a part of what we do. So excellent. Any other questions or thoughts here?
No comments or questions on the other platforms currently.
Yep. I figured you would jump in and tell me if there were. Is there anything, anybody who is batch recording, or who's pretty experienced, Scott, you've been doing this a long time, is there any key points that I missed that I should have covered in that episode? I'm just curious. But let's see. I mean, sometimes when when we were doing our 3D print podcast, we didn't do video in the early days. It was audio only, and we had some pretty young child, sometimes even toddler and or an infant in there, and sometimes two, about a decade ago. And we would put our kids down to bed, and then 9 p.m. start recording, and record as many episodes as we could until we were too tired to continue and collapsed, right? So the wonderful thing about podcasting, if you're not doing video, certainly, is that you can do things like that and fit into your schedule when you want to. All right, so Scott has a comment, says, I like tweaking a Calendly link to capture everything in one spot: bio, social links, headshot, topic, etc. Makes it easier to introduce everyone in one spot. I agree. The booking calendar link is not to be overlooked. It's in terms of a data capture mechanism. We make it so that you're a guest on our show, you pick your date, you can see the time slots, choose your time slot, but you are not allowed to book it and be done with the process. It won't book it until you fill out our form. And there is certain required information there, and you've got to provide it. It's just the easier way. Otherwise, you end up chasing the guest down for that information at a later date, and that is never fun for anybody. It's the other thing that I should have mentioned maybe in the batch. I touched on it, but I didn't emphasize a point in the batch recording episode there. One of the things that would happen to me once in a while when I'm doing that batch recording several episodes in a day, especially with a guest episode, is have this wonderful interview discussion with a guest, and then something happens that derails me from recording that little pre-recorded introduction there, where my greeting opening to the episode, where I greet the listener and set up what the episode's about and who we're going to talk to and why, and then have some final thoughts after that interview. If something gets in the way, or you let something get in the way and derail you, and sometimes you don't have a choice, things happen. I mean, it could be somebody banging on your front door and demands your attention, or your car alarm goes off. I mean, who knows? There's all sorts of things that can happen. More often for me, it was something in business. Somebody needed my attention. And so once in a while, I would not record right after that interview, that, and because I said I leave that space after you, that time to, while it's fresh in my mind, record that little bit of lead into the episode and throw to the interview, and then, some post discussion or final thoughts after. And I wouldn't get back to it for days. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what did we talk about in that interview? And what were the important points? And inevitably I would end up having to re-listen to my own interview with that guest and refresh my memory and spend twice as much time as I should have before I can record those added pieces, because they were critical elements of my show. So that's a bad place to be. So anyway, in the batch recording, that's why, leaving that time and hopefully having dedicated time and not being distracted is important, because you want to do any of those additional little segment recordings while it's fresh in your mind right after you do that interview. So I know best laid plans doesn't always happen, but that's the goal for sure. Let's see. Next week, I am going to take a dive into a topic that I had sort of taken for granted, that we'd recorded an episode on this a long time ago and didn't need to cover it again. But I had an experience that I was reminded we need to have a discussion about this on an upcoming coaching call for the benefit of everyone. And it doesn't matter if you're a longtime podcaster or new to it. This one is something everyone is going to want to hear. It has to do with whether, you mark your show as explicit or not. And that's all I'm going to say right now. I'm not going to go too much into it, but boy, I was reminded, and I don't make the rules, by the way, it's really Apple that does on this one. I was reminded it's not quite as simple as, most of us would like it to be or think that it is. There's a lot of nuances to it and a lot of other considerations. So I'm going to talk about that next week. So just a little preview of what's coming up next week, and a very important topic. Anybody else have anything they want to share or say here in Zoom, in the chat? I know, Cody, you'll let me know if anybody out on the other platforms has a comment, but we don't have much more. I'll wrap it up. Don't need to keep everybody here. Let's see. Oh, we got a hand raised. Claire. Okay, Claire, I'll click here and you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks. I had a quick question. So yesterday we had a podcast reach out to us, and they said they couldn't record a show for themselves. So they shared our feed on their show, which was awesome. So I'm just wondering, how do we maximize getting that audience to come over to our podcast?
So I want to make sure I understand you clearly. They shared your feed on their show?
Yeah. Well, the episode that we released for this week, they shared that episode on their podcast. So the feed from this week's show.
So they literally republish your podcast?
Yes.
Or were they just talking about it?
They did a little intro and then they shared it.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So I would say thank you very much. Free exposure to their audience. I mean, I think that's fantastic. I would hope that within your show in general, and this is something you may want to think about, how do you capitalize on it? Well, it's really just about raising awareness of your show with new listeners, right? And so hopefully both in their little intro, they decided to share your show, hopefully referred to it by name, but even within your own episode, this is where you want to think about, even though you might think, well, everybody knows my show. Like for me, they've subscribed to Feed Your Brand. I don't need to say Feed Your Brand within the episode. Well, this is one example where maybe it'd be helpful if you hey, so Feed Your Brand listeners, I want to make sure you understand this. Or say, well, any of you who listen to Feed Your Brand on a regular basis, you will know that I often am a advocate of this. So throwing your podcast name in there in your regular episodes not only is sort of reinforcing your show name and brand for your own listeners, but if this ever happens to you, you make sure that those new listeners are very clear what show they're listening to. And hopefully they're going to go and, after they hear it, they're going to go get more, seek out your show and subscribe. So I haven't really heard a lot of people tell me their show was rebroadcast on another show. So I'm thrilled.
It was surprising, but it was a nice little treat. I was like, yeah, please share it on your show. This is great. And we did say the name a couple of times, more than we normally do. And it was, perfect timing. So thanks for that reminder.
Great. Yeah, no, great timing. Yeah. I mean, look, other things, the more podcasting you do, the more episodes you record, you get more comfortable referring to your own show, saying that name, and that's great. But I think you also want to talk to the listener, make them feel more a part of the show, and refer to them by name, hey, Feed Your Brand listeners, or if you have a different name for your community, your tribe, whatever it is, refer to them, talk to them. It makes them realize, wow, they've recorded this for me. This isn't some repurposed YouTube video. This is meant for me, a podcast listener. So anyway, another thought. Scott has a comment here. He says, so we are back to doing daily episodes, 2 long form. You're welcome, Claire. 2 long form, 3 short, 15-minute or less episodes. Daily episodes. All right, Scott, I'm gonna let you unmute. I want to hear what you're saying about that. Provide me a little, if you're able to, provide me a little sort of context.
Can you hear me?
Can.
All right, so we've after having a little bit of pod fade the last few months, really decided, okay, let's double down, especially after we came back from FinCon. And so we looked at things and looked at some other experts and stuff like that, other podcasts. And okay, we've got long, our average episode's about 45 minutes to an hour long with the Note Closer show. And so we said, well, let's re-dive into it, because we reached out to our audience and we started seeing that short video, because we do a lot of video as well. Every podcast is a video. So started seeing short videos really doing well as far as views. I said, okay, let's do 2 long episodes like we normally do, because we've got a bunch recorded, and let's just start doing, instead of doing 2, trying to do long form content, let's do some short quick hits throughout the week. And so we started that this week, Monday, Wednesday, and then we have another one already uploaded for Friday. We're just recording, less than 15 minutes. I think 15 minutes we turn into a longer form, but 15 minutes or less. And then we're sharing it across, not only as an episode, we're also sharing on YouTube, sharing on LinkedIn, all that stuff. But we had a good day on Monday alone, was 1,500 plus downloads for the first time we did it. So
Wow.
We're like, okay, I think we can, do a pretty good job with doing this, to add into the longer form content. And we've already gotten feedback from folks like, oh, I like the shorter episodes, because we did a coming attractions episode, just talking about how we're going to fill in some of the short form, like nuggets and tips of the day, or something that's short, and people really have loved it so far. So that's, so I'm literally recording to keep it fresh. So like my Friday episode is written for Friday. I did an episode today based off of a TikTok video that really did well from somebody else. And so just, that's the focus. I know it may seem like a lot, but literally short upload, short description, and just getting it out there.
Yeah. So it's just self-publishing, right?
Yep. The 3 short
awesome.
ones, the longer ones, obviously we want longer, that's the blog and everything else fully produced. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So,
I think that's fantastic, Scott. And what you're going to find, and what any of us would find with our podcast, if we're doing a weekly show in general, or you're doing, 2 long form a week, whatever, whatever you're doing, if you increase the frequency of podcasts you publish, even with shorter episodes, 15-minute, whatever, you're putting more podcasts out there, and more people are going to listen to them. So that's more plays, it's more downloads of your show. And wherever you are in the charts or in any of the algorithms within the listening apps, you're going to immediately get a bump and probably more visibility for your show, just because you're putting out more content. And all of those algorithms are first driven with how many plays you get or how many downloads you get. And the more episodes you have, the more downloads you get. So it's purely a function of math.
Right.
So plus, I think sometimes, you're having more touch points with your community they don't have to invest quite as much time. They know that interview episode's going to be longer, and all right, yep, I'm gonna strap in, and I want to go into this deep dive with you on this guest. But if you get them used to other days of the week having more touch points, shorter episodes, a nice nugget, to start the day with or something, you're just really nurturing that relationship and enhancing it with your listener. So I'm all for it. It's really a little similar to what you're sort of doing what Tracy and I did in the early days of our first podcast. We wanted to kill it with content. We're publishing 5 days a week. You've been doing something different for a bunch of years, and now you're sort of going in that direction yourself.
Yeah, and then when you add in that we're releasing another episode every Monday for our Note Night in America podcast, for our Monday night webinars, and then releasing another episode for Note Camp, which is our mid-year conference that we mentioned earlier. So we're technically cranking out somewhere between 7 and 8 episodes of podcasts a week now.
Wow.
That's fantastic. And obviously you wouldn't be doing it if you weren't seeing that it was working for you. Like you said, you're getting more plays, right? You're getting more views. And for you and your business, staying present and top of mind with your audience leads to more conversion, doesn't it?
Yeah, it totally does. It totally does with coaching, because I started looking back at things that we were doing at the peak of everything. And it was that we were cranking out an episode basically daily. And just whether it was starting off as a Facebook Live, like we originally started 5 years ago, to once we converted with your expertise in persuasion to doing podcasts, I was like, okay, let's just start cranking it out. And we've taken it for granted with what we had and stuff like that. But we already have the number one YouTube channel, number one podcast for our niche. Is now we want to dominate everything. And of course, everything is getting shared across Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and TikTok and stuff like that now. But we're literally a shock and awe kind of marketing aspect to get everything out. And it's not taking a lot of extra work to get it done either. It's actually less than really 30 minutes a day to get all this stuff out. So it's not been bad at all.
And well, there you go. I mean, that's again, not exactly batch recording, but because you're doing it daily, but you have planned it into your day. You're going to spend this much time putting out a new marketing message as a podcast, as a live stream, as all sorts of things. And you're it's something you can manage, and it's working for you.
Yeah.
So I'm thrilled. I'm glad to hear it, Scott. Yeah, you have for a while I was wondering, Scott going to keep publishing episodes? But now you're like, you've dove into the deep end of the pool again, right?
Well, when you have 700 episodes, like, what the hell am I going to talk about? You know what I mean?
Well,
and then, of course, we had a few events that were back to back in August that were just with our Note Camp and then our mastermind and then another thing. And I was just worn out. I've been burning the candle at both ends a lot. So I'm rejuvenated, excited, and the numbers are already starting to provide some good stuff. And we're seeing increased engagement across all social media platforms, and that's led to a couple different interesting financial discussions with potential sponsors on some stuff too. So
hey, there you go. I like it. Awesome.
Cool, bud.
All right.
I got to run. Great stuff as always, Tom.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate your, joining us and showing up and
Thanks, Scott.
participating. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. All right, everyone. I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much for joining our weekly client coaching call. Thanks for participating, and we'll be back next week. I'll be back next week with another important topic. Okay. Until then, have a great week.